File number 205237FY, People versus Mahar Zahari. Counsel, your appearances for the record.
Clerk service on behalf of the people.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. David Grimm on behalf of Mahar Zahari.
Sir, your name?
Mahar Zahari.
Okay. Where we left off last time. We finished with Lieutenant Commission, Officer Foley, Officer McNeil, Officer Decker, and Sergeant Steve Chamberlain, and then Detective Wood. Please call your next witness.
Brooklyn Neifert.
What is the name?
Neifert.
Yeah.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
You can put your hand down, and if you feel comfortable because there's nobody around you, I ask that you take your mask down so that the court reporter can hear you better. Okay, have a seat. And please state your name and spell it for the record.
Brooklyn Neifert, Brooklyn. Neifert is Neifert.
Very good, thank you. You may proceed, counsel.
And could you please introduce yourself once again?
I'm Brooklyn Neifert.
And Ms. Neifert, I'm going to take you back to the date of August the 11th of last year. Do you recall that date?
Yes.
And somebody by the name of Aaron Green, does that individual have any, did they have any relationship to you on that date?
Yes, he was my boyfriend.
And at some point in time earlier in the day, were you and Mr. Green in a vehicle traveling around?
I was at work that day. He came and picked me up from work, and we went back to his friend's house.
Right. And what were the plans that day?
He was supposed to go to the gas station to go get some weed. His friends were supposed to come pick him up, take him there, and that was him.
Okay. And do you recall driving around with Aaron, and you're in a vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And was there anyone else in the vehicle as you were driving around?
No, it was me and him.
Who was the driver? Who was the passenger?
He was driving, I was in the passenger seat.
And at some point in time, did Aaron request that you kind of communicate with somebody over his cell phone as it related to what he was going to be doing at a gas station later that day?
Yes, so he handed me his phone. He said, "Here, text this person for me. I'm supposed to go to the gas station to get weed from him."
Okay.
And he was telling me what to say.
And do you know what kind of, I guess, social media platform or how these texts or communications were being sent?
Snapchat texting, so they weren't saved or anything.
If you could explain for the judge, what does Snapchat texting mean?
So you text someone and it's there, and then after you swipe off of the message is kind of like gone forever.
So can you comment now, you have Mr. Green's phone?
Yeah.
And what is Aaron's, does he have a username on Snapchat that you remember?
Yeah, crispy_race.
Underscore race?
Crispy?
Crispy.
Crispy?
Yes.
Underscore
Race.
race, RACE?
Yes.
Okay.
And you recall what the username of the individual that you were communicating with on Snapchat?
It was a Dave Baroni.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to speak up, I can't hear you.
Dave Baroni.
Dave Baroni?
Yeah. I don't know the exact username, but it was my name.
All right. Well, if I showed you kind of that, a document, would that help refresh your recollection as to what that username may have been?
Yeah.
All And if you could just review this to yourself for 30 seconds. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, and after reviewing that document, this would have been a Snapchat communications document. Did that help refresh your recollection?
Yes,
And what was the username that you communicated?
Dave_Brown.
And
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to catch all of that. I'm not sure.
Dave_Baroni.
Thank you.
And what was the substance of what you're communicating with to this Dave_Baroni on Snapchat?
Where they were gonna meet at
Through
to
these
make
communities?
this transaction.
Okay. And where was this? Well, there was supposed to be a transaction
Yeah,
involving
for
what?
the week.
Okay, weed meaning marijuana.
Yes.
Did you know how much?
I think it was a couple pounds. I don't even know.
Okay. And was the subject of money, did that come to play during these communications?
Yes.
And who was supposed to be buying versus selling the marijuana?
Aaron was supposed to be buying.
And how do you know this?
I might have an objection at this point on it. I'm having and maybe part of it is me being a technical, but there might be a hearsay objection in there someplace. But the way the witness is testifying, she's not indicating is someone with her talking. Is she looking at a cellular phone device? How is she gaining the information that she's sharing with the court and us?
So far, what she's testified to is that she was in the car with the decedent, that he was relaying the information to her to put on the phone. That's what I heard.
I'm gonna lodge a hearsay objection.
And I was, prepared for this possibility, Your Honor. And my response to that would be this: under 801 D2E, these statements I think would be classified as non-hearsay, as co-conspirator statements. That this is a statement made that we know at this point from somebody by the name of a Dave_Baroni, who's been previously identified as somebody that has been likely connected to the vehicle that the defendant was in at the time of this shooting, and that was later stopped by police officers during a canine track.
Well, let's analyze this. So your objection is to hearsay as to what statement? The statement of the decedent to the witness, of the context of the text, or of the response from Mr. Baroni, or both?
Both.
So we have statements of a drug deal that's yet to be completed. Okay, that there's being preparation now for that drug deal. And what 801 D2E states is that to qualify as an admission of a co-conspirator under MRA 801 D2E, a statement must be made during the course and in furtherance of the conspiracy. If either requirement is not met, the statement must be excluded. Well, here, this conspiracy has not been completed yet. They're in the planning stage of.
And as an offer of proof, the conspiracy is between who?
It's between Mr. Baroni and the defendant and Mr. Green.
As far as the defendant, I haven't heard anything from this witness that would tie him into the conspiracy.
Or it could be the defendant or his front seat passenger, Mr. Baroni. Either way, that's a.
But there has not been, you have not established that Mr. Baroni was with the defendant. I'm going to need you to lay a better foundation if you want to rely on 801 D2E.
Well, I guess a better foundation that Mr. Baroni was with the defendant at the time that these statements were made, or at that day?
That he was with him at the time these statements were made. and that it was part of a conspiracy. If you want to get it under that exception, well, it's not an exception, it's a,
Sure. Well, would this court consider Mr. Baroni being the defendant, or I guess the subject of the other co-conspirator for the purpose of the state? The defendant doesn't have to be. It could be Mr. Baroni.
correct. I'm going to give you a little latitude on this with your objection duly noted.
All right, Your Honor, I would indicate that above that, and that's why I asked who was communicating here. If it sounded to me like this witness was being communicated to by Aaron Green, who
She testified was in the car with her at the time.
Was relating. She was not a part of the conversation, and she was relating what she understood was going on at the time, and she was what she is relating is hearsay in both of the ways that I previously objected.
So noted. If you can tie it up and
Sure.
establish the foundation,
Sure.
I will allow it under 801B2E. If you cannot, then it will be excluded.
Sure. Now, how is it that you're viewing these messages on this phone? Is this something you're hearing or something you're reading?
I'm reading, because he's telling me to text them, and like.
Who's
the
telling you
messages-
to text?
Aaron.
Okay.
Aaron's telling me to text the Dave Baroni, and the messages are going back and forth on Snapchat.
Okay, so Aaron is telling.
Let me try to clear this up. You are the person that has the phone in your hand, correct? You are viewing the text messages that are coming through, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Green is directing you how to respond.
Yes.
And you are typing them in and sending them, correct?
Yes.
You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, and Your Honor, just my next question is going to get to more kind of substance now, and I think that, the people have established a co-conspirator statement between Mr. Green and Mr. Baroni based upon Ms. Neifrit's explanation as to how this interaction is taking place.
Go ahead.
Now, at some point during the course of these text message exchanges on Snapchat, was the sum of money discussed?
Yeah, it was like $3,000 something for a pound.
Okay, and you made a statement actually shortly after this incident, or actually the date of this incident on August the 11th of 2020, correct?
Yes.
And in that statement, did you indicate then, at the time, what the dollar amount of this drug transaction was supposed to be for?
Yes.
And you recall what that was specifically?
3,200.
Okay, and that was the amount of money that Mr. Green was supposed to bring to this transaction, correct?
Yes.
And was a location discussed during this exchange?
Yeah, well, he had told me.
Who's he?
Aaron.
Okay.
Aaron told me. I wasn't in the discussion of that, like on the Snapchat.
Well, tell me what you were in the discussion on Snapchat for. Was location discussed while you were, I guess, typing back what Aaron was telling you?
So at first, it was supposed to be at the Dave Baroni's house, and they changed the location to the Speedway gas station.
All right, and were you, I guess, in control of Mr. Green's phone when the discussion of location was changed to the Speedway gas station?
No,
No, okay. But you know that by how?
by Aaron telling me.
Okay.
Yes.
And at some point, does Aaron need to go to the Speedway gas station?
Yes, he does.
And what location are you at when Aaron leaves to go to the Speedway gas station?
I was sitting in his bedroom.
All right, and what location would this have been? His home?
Yeah, at his grandma's house.
Okay, and at some point, does somebody else arrive at that house with Aaron?
So someone came to pick him up. He told me it was his friends coming to pick him up, and he would be right back.
And did he indicate who those friends were?
He told me Q and Tay, but from what I'm hearing from other people.
Well,
that-
don't tell me what you heard from other people.
Okay,
Okay. So Aaron, 2 other individuals came to pick him up,
right,
as far as you know?
yes,
And did you observe the vehicle in which these individuals came in?
I did not,
Okay. Did you observe the vehicle in which Aaron and these individuals left?
I did not,
Did you observe Aaron leave the house?
yes,
And what did you do? Did you stay behind?
yes.
And about what time of day would this have been, if you recall, that Aaron left his grandmother's house?
Probably around like 6:30, 7 o'clock maybe,
Okay. Was that the last time you saw Aaron?
yes.
I have no further questions.
Very good.
Cross-examining,
Yes.
um, how many, when Aaron and you left, from wherever he picked you up, how many different cell phones did you see Aaron using that night?
Just one,
You only saw one cell phone that night?
yes,
Oh, you, Aaron,
yes.
and, let me ask you this. Speedway gas station. Did you ever go by the Speedway gas station where Dave Baroni worked?
I thought, he worked at the Ryan gas station on
Okay.
11 mile.
So,
Is it a Speedway gas station?
No,
Okay. He worked at a gas station on 11 Mile.
yeah,
are you sure it wasn't the Speedway gas station, the one where Baroni worked?
I'm sure,
And when plans were made to meet Baroni that night, was, what Speedway gas station was the meeting held at?
the one on 10 mile and Hayes.
The, do you recall the night of the shooting telling a East Point police officer, in fact, your exact words were, Brooklyn told me she knew Aaron was going to the Speedway on 10 Mile.
Yep.
And to you, the Speedway on 10 Mile means the one that you drove to later that night?
Yes, where I found him, yes. I had Aaron's location on my phone, that's how I found him, because he was not answering my texts or calls, because he was there for quite a while. I was wondering what was going on, he was answering me. So I looked at his location and I proceeded to drive to that gas station and I found him there on the ground bed.
You indicated on direct exam that Aaron and his 2 friends left the house. The house is in Warren, is it not? I'm not gonna ask the
You're
location.
correct.
About 6:30 in the evening, is that correct?
Yeah, somewhere around there, 6:30, 7 o'clock.
And when you say he was gone for a long time, what did you do to reach him?
After about 45 minutes, I got a little weirded out about it, so that's when I texted him to ask him if he was okay. what's going on? Why aren't you home yet? Because he told me he would be right back.
And unable to reach him, is that correct?
That's correct. My messages were delivering, but he was not answering.
The individual that all of the negotiations went through, to your knowledge, were Dave Barone, right?
Correct.
And you started to indicate that, well, let me ask you this. The two people that Aaron met up with at his grandmother's house were known to you as Tae, T-A-E, and Q, the letter Q, correct?
Yeah.
And had you ever met the Chaldean male that Aaron was negotiating with? Had you ever met that person?
No, I've never personally met that person.
And Mr. Grimm, when you're referring to a Chaldean male, is this Mr. Barone?
Yes.
Thank you.
Certainly, you would never met my client, have you?
No, I have not.
The were all of the communications that you're aware of that Aaron had with Mr. Barone, through what, besides Snapshot, were there communications in any other form?
No, as far as I know, he met this person at the gas station.
At which gas
The
station?
one on 11 Mile and Ryan. In Warren.
Sure that's not a Speedway also?
I'm sure.
Okay. How long had Aaron been talking and or meeting by whatever form with Mr. Barone before that night, the night of the 11th?
I do not know that.
When was the first time you believe there was communication with Mr. Barone? Was that on the 11th or before that date?
I mean, they met at the gas station, spoke at the gas station, that's how they exchanged Snapchats, but other than the 11th, I'm not sure when they spoke.
Right, and how do you know they met at the gas station before this date?
I asked Aaron, how does he know this person? Like, why are we going to get beat off this person? And he told me how he met them.
How well before August 11th did you know Tate?
I didn't.
Had you ever met him before?
No.
How well before August 11th did you know Q?
I didn't. I've only seen him in person, but he was off in a distance, so I never really met him, talked to him.
That night, when you didn't hear back from Aaron as soon as you would have liked to have heard back from Aaron, did you have any communication with Q?
No.
And neither you called him or he called you, is that correct?
Correct.
That night, when you didn't hear from Aaron, did you have any communication with Kay?
No.
Once again, you didn't call him, he didn't call you.
Right.
Have you ever talked to Kay since that night?
Nope, I haven't talked to anybody.
Did you ever hear from Q since that night?
No.
Say, I haven't talked with anybody, anybody,
Like any of his friends.
any of Aaron's friends?
Yeah.
Was Aaron, when you left the house that night, carrying a gun?
No, he was with me now. He didn't own a gun.
That wasn't my question. My question was he carrying a gun?
No. He was not.
Do you recall what type of clothing? I'm not going to ask you to try to remember exactly what he was wearing that day, but I'm going to ask you what was he wearing? A jacket, a jersey?
No, he was wearing Jordans. He was wearing Adidas sweatpants and a white t-shirt with a bake on it.
Right? So, from the waist up, the only clothing he was wearing was a white t-shirt, correct?
And it had a picture on the front of it, yes.
No jacket, correct?
Correct.
And I'm sorry, what type of slacks or running, what other clothing was he wearing?
They were Adidas jogging pants and then Jordans as his shoes.
All right. Thanks for telling me what the Jordans were. I'm not quite as old as I look.
You're okay.
Had you ever seen Aaron carry a handgun?
Objection not relevant is to ever.
Sustained.
The amount of the cost of marijuana that night, according to what you've been told by Aaron, was to be $3,200, correct?
Correct.
Where did Aaron get the $3,200 from?
From selling meat.
And you saw the $3,200 that night before he left?
Yes, he always had his money on him.
And when you say he always had his money on him, as much as $3,200?
More, less. Yeah, he always carried his money on him, however much he had.
With the type of clothing that he was wearing, or the pants, do those pants have pockets?
Yes, they do, and they zip.
But that night, you personally never saw any $3,200, correct?
I didn't count his money, but I saw him with money that night, yes.
And when you saw him go out the door, how, since he had these spiffy pants with, that zipped, you didn't see the money, did you?
It was in his pocket. He always had his money in his pocket.
My question though is, did you see any money in his possession that night before he left with his two friends?
Yeah,
You see it and how much did you see?
I don't know. He always had his money and he was always playing with it. I didn't count it. I don't know.
When Aaron left the house that night, besides the 3 items of clothing that you described, he had a purse over his shoulder, did he not?
Yeah,
Okay. Describe the purse for me.
it's like a tan little miniature backpack. It was mine.
But he was carrying it that night, correct?
Yeah,
Uh, For what purpose was he carrying a purse that night?
I'm not sure.
But you know, if he was carrying that money that night, it was not in the purse, but it was in his pockets.
Yeah, well, could have been.
Well, what could have been?
The money could have been in his pocket. He could have put it in the bag. I don't know. I didn't watch him when after he left. You know, I couldn't see him.
I have just one moment.
Sure.
Had you seen him carry a purse before?
Yeah, he put like his little knickknacks in that bag.
Like what?
He put his money in there, his Rellos in there,
I'm sorry, his what?
his Rellos, like to smoke.
Okay, Rello is a cigarette?
Yeah, so it's tobacco.
Okay.
Yeah. He just put little stuff like that in there.
Just one more moment. I have nothing further at this time.
Very good. Any redirect?
Just real quick, when you were texting Aaron after 45 minutes had gone by and you were concerned, you remember that line of questioning in your response?
Yeah.
How was it that you were communicating with Aaron? Was it through Snapchat also?
No, that was through iMessage.
iMessage, okay. I have no further.
Okay, you may be excused. Thank you. Oh.
Oh, and were you with Aaron the whole entire time that he was at his grandmother's home?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Once he left that home, you don't know, obviously you didn't have eyes on him,
Correct.
where he may have placed money or put an object, you have no idea.
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Yes,
All right,
good.
you may be excused.
Thank you.
Do you need a cloud?
Yeah. Okay.
Your Honor, if I might take 2 minutes while we're bringing in the next witness.
Sure.
Thanks.
You know what Rello is? Oh, a Barillo, Tiparillo?
Be like the wrappers for a cigar.
I was gonna say, is it a cigarillo?
Okay.
Take the tobacco out. put
Learn all
marijuana
kinds
in.
of interesting things.
That's what I was, I mean, I've never, but I've heard of a cigarillo.
A
Sounds
cigarillo.
like, looks like a cigar.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes, I do.
You may have a seat. But Mr. Grimm stepped out, so we're gonna wait until he gets back into. back on the record. Let the record reflect that I have sworn in the next witness. And I'm going to ask you to put your appearance, your name on the record, and please spell your name.
Barry Petrangelo, Maryi, Pietrangello.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Okay, and doctor, could you please introduce yourself once more?
My name is Dr. Mary Petrangelo. I am a medical examiner for Macomb County.
And I would submit to defense counsel just for the purpose of the preliminary examination, that there could be a stipulation that Dr. Petrangelo could testify as an expert in the field of forensic pathology for the purpose of this exam. And be such qualified.
I'd just like to ask a couple of questions.
Sure, I'll let Mr. Grimm then board here on the issue of doctor's qualifications as an expert.
Doctor, have you ever testified as an expert in the field of forensic pathology prior to today?
51 times.
You kept it close count. Have you written or published any literature on the subject of this specialty?
I have not other than abstracts.
Where did you receive your postgraduate degree?
My postgraduate, do you mean after medical school?
No, let's take it from medical school.
Or medical school. Okay, my medical school was Wayne State University. After completing my curriculum there, I entered a family practice residency and practiced family medicine for 9 years. Then I entered a pathology residency at Beaumont, Beaumont Hospital. And my curriculum included anatomic and clinical pathology. And after that 4-year period, I did a year of forensic pathology at Cuyahoga the County Medical Examiner's Office, which is in the greater Cleveland area.
Thank you, doctor. I have nothing further.
For purposes of exam, will you stipulate?
For purposes of the exam, I will stipulate.
Very good, you may proceed.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Petrangelo, taking you back to the date of August the 11th of 2020, did you have the occasion to go to a location within the city of East Point, on 10 Mile Road, that being specifically a 15121 East 10 Mile Road?
Yes,
And when you arrive at the scene, what is it that you observe?
well, the most pertinent observation was a deceased individual lying on the ground near a gasoline pump, covered with a white sheet or gown of some sort.
Okay. And is it common in your job as a forensic pathologist to attend the scenes of crimes?
We attend the scenes of homicides.
Okay. To attend the scenes of homicides.
Correct.
And at the time of your arrival, was this in fact a scene of a homicide?
Yes,
Were you able to take vital signs or do any, initial examination regarding whether or not the subject of this homicide was in fact deceased at the time of your arrival?
I did. Yes, I was able to examine him at the scene.
And what was your conclusion as to this individual being deceased?
He had already been declared dead before I arrived on scene.
Okay.
I got there around 11:30 at night. I think this happened several hours earlier.
All right.
So this was a young, thin, black male lying on his back near a gas pump. He had early rigor mortis present and liver mortis, which is the collection of blood in the dependent areas due to gravity, that was still blanching.
And that further corroborated the fact that this individual had been deceased for some period of time.
Yes,
And do you take any photographs to document your observations of the body at this point in time?
the medical legal death investigator that I was with took the photographs.
And at some point, the body of Mr. Green is taken to your office, correct?
Yes,
And at that point in time, you do, a thorough examination.
right the following morning,
All right.
and we proceeded with the autopsy.
And are additional photographs taken, aside from the ones that were taken at the scene, more photographs taken at the medical examiner's office the morning of the examination?
Yes,
And who is the individual that takes those photographs?
a number of individuals that are assisting me at the time. There are morgue specialists who assist in various aspects.
But you're observing these photographs?
Yes, I am present and observing and usually at times instructing.
And during the course of, your examination, is there anyone else present that isn't officially affiliated with the office of the forensic, the office of the medical examiner?
In this case, I believe one law enforcement individual is present.
And,
Detective Chamberlain?
okay, Detective Chamberlain was present,
Yes,
and was he observing this autopsy
yes,
that you were performing?
yes.
And during the course of your performing the autopsy, do you recall making maybe a comment to Detective Chamberlain about what you believe to be the entrance versus the exit wound on Mr. Green's body?
I did.
All right. And at that time, you made this comment or statement to Detective Chamberlain that you completed your report and reviewed all of your findings.
No,
Was this more or less kind of maybe an off-the-cuff statement based on just?
Well, I'm going to object to that characterization. We don't like an answer, so we try to downplay it as to something off the cuff. She can testify.
Sure. Okay. So you indicated an observation prior to you fully completing your examination.
yes.
And you recall what that statement was?
The statement was gunshot wound of the chest.
Okay. When you say of the chest, meaning entrance to the chest,
Yes,
exit the back.
that was my first impression.
Okay. And was there, when you look at evidence of an entrance versus an exit wound, what are some of the characteristics that you look at to determine which is which?
Entrance wounds, generally speaking, have round to oval shapes. They generally have clean or pretty clean wound edges. And frequently.
I'm sorry, I apologize. You said wound and there was another.
Edges, wound edges.
Wound edges.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Twice today you
No.
don't know.
And if you can just speak up a little bit.
Oh, I will, and I sympathize. I wear hearing aids myself, and I'm always begging people to speak up. So I'll hold this closer and hopefully won't run into that.
Okay. And now you were describing the characteristics of entrance versus exit
In general,
in general.
yes.
Okay.
They round to oval, smooth to regular, fairly smooth wound edges, sometimes margin of abrasion around the edges.
And this would be an entrance wound that you just
Yes.
described. Okay. Now, and what are some of the characteristics of an exit wound?
Well, generally speaking, an exit wound is frequently larger than an entrance wound and can assume many different shapes. They can be stellate or slit-like or very irregular in their appearance.
Now, you just indicated us, generally speaking, what these wounds appear to be,
Yes,
not always.
not always.
Are there occasions in which an entrance wound can, to the naked eye, look like an exit wound?
Yes, and vice versa. It can be challenging to determine which is the entrance and which is the exit.
And did you run into any challenges in making a determination initially, which was which entrance versus exit upon your examination of Mr. Green?
Well, as I said, my first impression was looking down at the body initially. The thought that went through my head is, okay, the entrance wound is here on the chest.
And at that time, did that chest wound, I guess, visually show characteristics consistent with an entrance wound?
Yes, it was oval in shape, had fairly clean wound edges, and had a little bit of a abrasion margin around it.
And did you look at, and at some point in time, did you begin, after making this statement to Detective Chamberlain, begin to further assess your, I guess, your inclination or opinion regarding the entrance versus the exit wound?
Yes,
And did you look at clothing to help further determine what was an entrance wound, what was an exit wound?
yeah, that's one of the things, yes.
And did the clothing that Mr. Green was wearing that evening further add to your ability to make a determination regarding exit wound versus entrance wound?
Not definitively, but in the entire general picture, yes, it was contributory.
And how so?
The holes in the clothing had, first of all, lined up with both defects in the skin. The back of the shirt was soaked in blood, so it couldn't really be evaluated for surrounding soot or bullet white or those types of things. But it was a very round structure. The front of the shirt, which was not so bloody, had kind of a brown pattern, brown and yellow pattern to it. The defect in the shirt there had a slit-like appearance to it.
Which, I guess, maybe not definitively, but in, you know, the totality of your findings, what was the significance of that?
Well, that is a finding that would lead to the front being the exit and the back being the entrance.
And you had indicated that, you know, the back was filled with blood, the shirt.
Yes.
And did you note, did you indicate any, in your report, any evidence of close range fire? Stippling?
But yeah, by close range fire, I'm assuming you mean stippling,
Yes.
soot, or muzzle imprint.
Yes.
And there was none on either wound.
Okay. And what could have been an impediment to your ability to find?
Well, blood, range,
Clothing?
pardon me?
Clothing?
Oh, definitely the clothing. The clothing was between, obviously, the projectile and the body. So those three things.
Okay. And is stippling more something that you observe on the skin, or can it sometimes be observed on an article of clothing?
It's a phenomena that's seen on the skin. If it's seen on clothing, you classify it as pseudo-stippling, not necessarily stippling.
And could blood, a soaked, bloody shirt impair your ability to to see pseudo-stippling?
Possibly pseudo-stippling, but not stippling.
Sure.
It would not impair my ability to see stippling.
And as you had previously indicated, stippling is a phenomenon that is observed on the skin, not on clothing.
Yes,
So it's fair to say that Mr. Green were wearing a t-shirt, which it appeared that he was, correct?
yes,
One would not see stippling.
depending on, again, range of fire.
Now, at what distance would one see stippling?
Generally a centimeter or two, up to maybe 10, 12 inches from the body.
Okay, from the muzzle, or
Yeah, from
the
the
barrel of the
muzzle.
gun, muzzle to the skin.
Yes,
All right, so from about a foot closer.
yes.
Now, how many, I guess, wounds did you observe on the body of Mr. Green?
One on the left chest and one on the left back.
And were you able to associate those with one projectile, or were those caused from multiple projectiles?
There was no evidence that there were multiple projectiles involved. And
So for the lack of a better word, the wound that you observed on the front and the back was, one was an entrance, one was an exit
yes,
from one projectile.
yes,
And were you able to determine a path of travel from the entrance route to the exit route?
yes. After I had finished the autopsy, reviewed the photographs from the scene, reviewed the photographs from the autopsy, reviewed the x-ray results, then I was able to conclude about trajectory.
And indicated that you reviewed slides and photographs.
The microscopic slides were reviewed many weeks later.
Okay.
They were fairly non-contributory.
But were they reviewed before you authored your report?
No,
Okay, after?
well, before my report, not before I issued the death certificate.
Okay, sure, okay. But before you authored your report on file number ME 3559-20, your medical examiner report dated, I believe this was October the 12th of 2020.
Are you showing October the 12th?
Or I'm sorry, November the 10th of
Okay,
2020.
November the 10th
Yes.
of 2020. Yes, all of that had been reviewed before.
Okay. And is there something that reviewing a picture and slides are able to provide you in determining the findings in your report, even something such as an entrance versus an exit wound that maybe the naked eye in observing something, in front of you just simply does not?
Yes, and the camera, a photograph of something can actually show more detail than your eye would notice at the time that you're looking at it live.
And did that further enhance your ability to kind of make a conclusion in this case regarding the entrance versus the exit wound?
It contributed to that.
And did you also do a detailed examination regarding the inside of Mr. Green's body and the path of the bullet and the things that bullet may have come into contact with in its travel through his body that assisted you in your determination of entrance versus exit?
Yes,
And can you describe to the judge what those observations were?
sure. And if you don't understand something, just please ask me.
I will.
Okay. So I'll start with the wound on the left upper chest. Examining the tissue around that wound. And that wound involved a fracture of a rib. that, the appearance of that tissue, that area, it appears as though the rib fragments, the bone fragments, are pointing in an external direction from the body and from the surrounding surfaces.
When you say an external direction,
Outwards, not inwards.
the wound in the upper chest,
All right, now I'm inside the body.
you're inside the body and there's a fractured rib. And are you saying the rib fractures were facing the back or the chest?
The front.
The front. Okay. All right.
Then, when I looked at the back wound,
Okay.
there was again a rib fracture involved. And the fracture fragments appeared as though they were coming from outside, inside, outside, out to in.
Okay, I don't understand out to in.
Well, if they're looking at something,
We're talking about the back now.
the back, down,
So-
down,
so-
down
so
lower. And again, it's a wound that.
So would the fractures be pointing towards the back,
No, the fractures were pointing towards the front.
towards the front? And then in the front, you saw fractures consistent with that were pointing towards the front.
Yes,
Okay, I
so
understand.
that was what,
And when you, and just to further clarify, when you say toward the front, that's toward the chest, correct?
yes,
Okay. The front being the chest and the back meaning literally the back of the body.
yes,
Okay. And would that be consistent or evidence consistent with the direction of travel of a bullet?
yes,
All right. And the direction of travel in the bullet that was consistent with those findings of the rib fractures would have been what?
the direction would be from back to front, slightly right to left, and upward.
And did you author a report dated November the 10th of 2020?
Yes,
And in that report, did you conclude or come up with the cause of death and the manner of death?
the cause of death was gunshot wound of the back, and manner of death, it was homicide.
And if I could hand you your report, it's 1, 2, 3, 7 pages, and I'll have this marked as People's Exhibit.
That would be exhibit number 10.
I'm going to title it 14 since I have a few other exhibits.
Okay.
That report.
Yes, this is my report.
And is that an accurate copy of your report?
Yes, it is.
People would move to admit what's been marked as People's Exhibit 14, the medical examiner's report.
No objections. To this.
Exhibit number 14, the autopsy report will be admitted.
Thank you. And if I could hand you with what I have marked as People's Proposed Exhibits 10 through 13. And can you just review People's Proposed Exhibits 10, 11, 12, and 13?
Okay, so you want me to describe what I'm seeing on each photograph?
But before I have you go and describe them, do those, each of those pictures 10 through 13, do those fairly and accurately depict the body of Mr. Green as you were beginning to conduct your exam on August the 12th of 2020?
Yes,
People would move to admit People's Exhibits 10, 11, 12, and 13.
Mr. Grimm,
Once again, no objections to the PCC exam.
so admitted.
And first, to begin with, I guess we could talk with exhibits 10 and 11. Exhibits 10 and 11 indicate what?
Exhibits 10 and 11 are photographs of the wound on the left upper chest,
So the front of the body.
the front of the body, yes. One is a bit of a distance and one is closer up.
Is 10 from the distance or is 10?
10 is the one that's closer up, and 11 is the one that's from a little bit of a distance away.
And according to your report that you authored, exhibits 10 and 11 depict what you concluded to be the exit wound.
Yes,
Now, if we move to exhibits 12 and 13,
yes.
and what part of the body do exhibits 12 and 13 depict?
We are looking at the lower back, just left of the spine. And exhibit 12 demonstrates a photograph of the wound, the entrance wound at a distance. And 13 is a photograph of a close-up view of the entrance.
Thank you. And if you could just put those exhibits. Thank you. Now, is it fair to conclude that you received some information to further assist in your report of the nature of the circumstances surrounding the death of Mr. Green?
What do you mean?
I guess
by-
where he may have been positioned or seated at or near the time of death?
I received the police report
Okay.
back in October, after I had signed out a death certificate about it.
Now, did you review that police report?
I did,
And you reviewed that police report prior to authoring your final report dated on November the 10th?
yes,
And so you're aware that Mr. Green at some point was seated in a vehicle,
yes.
in the back passenger
In the
seat?
back passenger seat, yes.
Now, after reviewing that police report and I guess visualizing Mr. Green in the back seat of a vehicle, are his wounds to the back and to the chest consistent with one who would be exiting a vehicle?
With a wound that would be sustained as a person was exiting a vehicle,
Yes.
yes.
And how so?
Well, as a person generally exits a vehicle, they swing out of the door, kind of bend over a little bit, and then they get out. And that is consistent with the entrance wound being in the back.
And what happens to one's back as they begin to exit the vehicle and step out?
It goes forward, it moves forward, bends over a little bit.
And normally, if one is seated in a vehicle, their back would be exposed to what portion of the vehicle?
If one is seated in the vehicle,
Yes.
and their back would be up against or close to the seat, the back of the seat.
And as one begins to exit the vehicle and begins to put their feet on the ground, what direction does their back turn, or how would the back be positioned in the vehicle at that point in time?
The back would turn so that it was facing the inside of the car.
I have no further questions.
the exhibit?
Cross-examine, yes.
One moment, Mr. Crowe. You may proceed.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
Doctor, the first look that you had at Aaron Green, I believe was about 11:30 in the evening on August the 11th of 2020. Is that correct?
Yes,
And you indicated there was one officer there, I think. If you said more, correct me.
I didn't comment on the number of officers at the scene. There was one officer at the autopsy.
All right. And that was that Campbell?
Chamberlain.
Chamberlain, rather, yes, Stephen Chamberlain. How long did you remain at the gas station that night, having arrived there at about 11:30 in the evening?
About an hour.
And during the hour that you were there, did you offer a on the spot opinion as to what was the entrance room and what was the exit room to any of the officers who were there with you?
No,
On the next day, the 12th, was the autopsy, is that correct?
yes,
And about what time of day was that?
morning. I think it started at 9 something.
And that was observed by Detective Stephen Chamberlain, correct?
Yes,
And I'm quoting from Chamberlain's report. Dr. Pietrangelo's opinion was that there was one bullet point of entry and exit, most likely from the front, chest to back. Was that accurately reported by Detective Chamberlain?
yes,
And this how long did the autopsy last, would you imagine?
that is hard to say. I'm thinking 3 hours or perhaps.
And at that time, you had all of the evidence available to you that was gathered by the police, including clothing, photographs that were taken by the people who worked with you at the morgue, and all of that was available to you, correct?
It was available to me after the autopsy, yes.
But before you wrote your report,
Yes,
And in that 3 to 4 hours, certainly all of the other evidence was certainly you could choose to look at it when you chose to look at it. Is that correct?
Yes, I wouldn't stop the autopsy to go study photographs or print out photographs.
But anything that had already been prepared was available to you. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's correct.
At some time, at least 24 hours later, on August 13th of 20, you made a phone call to Detective Stephen Chamberlain. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And in that conversation to him, you indicated to East Point Police Department that you were changing your opinion about the direction of travel of the bullet. Is that correct?
Yes,
And in fact, you changed your opinion to the fact that the bullet traveled from rear back to back to the front, the chest. Is that correct?
yes.
Was there anything that you viewed at the scene on August the 11th that was important to you in your autopsy findings?
Not really. The scenes are chaotic and bloody, and I generally don't form any opinion at the scene.
Seeing the body in the context of whatever it was that happened, rather than flat on whatever type of slab is used at the morgue. Seeing the body in context, that doesn't sometimes assist very greatly.
Sometimes, yes.
Okay.
In this case, not really.
I think you've indicated that the direction in your report and in your testimony today, the direction of the gunshot wound is from back to front, word for word, back to front, right to left, and upward. Would that be accurate?
Yes,
That that one sentence standing alone doesn't mean a lot to me. Might I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Sure.
Doctor, so, I mean, reading that sentence and trying to imagine what that means, maybe it's because I skipped math and went to law school. But could you, I've got a red pen and a blue pen. Could you identify the wounds as best we can on something like this?
Sure.
Okay. And what I would ask first is that identify the wounds with the red pen. And if you would maybe put your initials next to each wound that you designated. And now, on both, indicate the wound track that you described to us in your testimony this afternoon.
Not my best suit is drawing, but
It's a lot better than mine.
so here we have back to front,
Okay,
we have right to left,
okay,
and then upward.
okay. So that is what was portrayed in that sentence, the one sentence in the report. As far as the track. Okay, okay, thank you. The, Your Honor, if you wish. And I will make a copy of that available to counsel.
And have we marked that as an exhibit?
The defense exhibit A.
Yes. Was the decedent's clothing, and there was some testimony about this, but just to be certain, did you test the decedent's clothing or skin for gunshot residue?
No, I did not.
And, where is the the victim's clothing at this point in time? It was preserved, correct?
It's with the East Point Police.
What can you tell us about the positions of the two parties at the time the fatal bullet was fired?
What can I tell you about the positions of what?
the two parties, the shooter and the person who ended up being hit by that bullet.
I don't know who the shooter is. I don't have firsthand knowledge of where the shooter was, at least at the time of the autopsy and report. But I have already testified as to the position of the decedent.
Then, the position of the decedent, are you saying then that the position of the decedent is not important as to the position of the person who was shot?
I'm not sure I understand with you what you mean, but I was able to testify to what I thought the position was of the individual who was shot.
And if you could please was it your testimony that the person who was shot was getting out of a car? And I think you indicated the information that you gathered before in making that conclusion or offering that conclusion was based on what you read in the police report. Would that be accurate?
No, there was discussion of that at the scene.
And at the scene, was the vehicle defendant, I'm sorry, the person who was shot, was that vehicle still at the scene?
I don't think so.
Have you ever seen that vehicle?
I have seen some photographs.
And do you feel that you might well, let me put it this way. Was that the only position the person who was shot could have been in at the time they were shot?
That is the position that makes the most sense to me.
And again, you don't have any information, do you, as to what position the defendant would have been in at the time the bullet was fired?
Other than hearsay, no.
And I'm going to take a wild guess here, and I'm going to guess that the hearsay you received came from police officers.
Most likely, yes.
I have no further questions on that.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Just one quick thing. Now, Doctor, you indicated that you reviewed the clothing of Mr. Green after you performed the autopsy, correct?
At some point during all of that, yes.
But after the autopsy itself.
I don't recall whether I reviewed it during the autopsy or after the autopsy.
Okay.
Because after the clothing is removed, it's placed on a table with a white sheet over it in the room. And I don't recall whether I went over there and looked before I had finished dissecting the organs or afterwards.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Nothing further.
Any additional witnesses?
No additional witnesses here.
Any defense witnesses?
None, Your Honor.
Argument?
Well, Your Honor, as far as count one, a murder in the second degree, the people have to prove a couple of different things. Number one, that the defendant caused the death of the victim. There's been evidence in this case that establishes a comment made by the defendant that I'm the shooter. There's been evidence linking a weapon that was found inside the defendant's vehicle, the front passenger seat, to shell casings collected at the scene, and that those casings match that weapon, coupled with the fact that the defendant comes back to the scene shortly after the shooting, indicating that he is the shooter. And number two, that the defendant committed this act of shooting Mr. Green with one of these three states of mind: that the defendant intended to kill, that the defendant intended to do great bodily harm, or that the defendant knowingly created a high risk of death or great bodily harm, having that, knowing that death or great bodily harm would be a likely result of his actions. Here, we have evidence that the defendant is in a vehicle occupied at one point in time by four people, three of those people being presumably associates of the defendant. The individual that Mr. Zahari retrieved a backpack from in the car parked behind the deceased, at some point in the reviewing that video, goes into the back seat and sits immediately next to Mr. Green. We know that Mr. Zuhari, the defendant, is in the driver's seat of that vehicle. And there is also evidence that there is a front seat passenger, and we know that in a couple of different ways. Through a canine track conducted by the East Point Police Department, Officer McNeil, whose canine rider detects the human scent from the gas pumps, the location of the shooting, to a street, Dale, approximately 3 blocks away from the shooting, and they find a Dave Baroni. We also can tell that there's somebody in the front passenger seat by reviewing the video itself. During the course of this backpack making its way into the front seat, you can see through that front windshield movement in the front passenger seat of that vehicle of some human body. Furthermore, that immediately after the shooting, Mr. Green's rear passenger door remains open, and you see somebody quickly open the front passenger side door and shut the rear passenger door quickly, and then get back in the front passenger seat. So by all those different methods and modes of observation and evidence, we can kind of conclude that there are, at one point, there's somebody in the front driver's seat, the defendant, and somebody in the front passenger seat, and then obviously Mr. Green in the rear passenger seat, and then another individual at some point in time in the rear driver's seat. And the video is telling in this case, and I know it's not very clear, but there was a reason why I kind of had it blown up in different forms for this court, or any trier of fact for that matter, to have a different perspective and a better view of what's going on. And what that video shows us is this. We know that a backpack enters the driver's side door through the efforts of the defendant retrieving it from the vehicle behind him. And by reviewing that video, it appears that that backpack then gets relayed to the person seated in the front passenger seat. And during the course of several minutes, you see what appears to be a white plastic bag present itself and then starting to be manipulated and moved around within that front passenger seat area. And as you continue to watch that vehicle, or the vehicle in that bag within the front windshield, it makes its way from the front seat to the back seat. And then immediately after that point in time, that white bag kind of disappears from the front to the back. Do you see that door that Mr. Green is seated right next to open? And he's falling out. It's the people's position, Your Honor, that Mr. Green had the bag of marijuana that he was going there to buy. We have information that Mr. Green was there supposedly to purchase $3,200 worth of marijuana. We know from the evidence that we have is that Dave Baroni was stopped on Dale Street with $880 in his pocket. And Mr. Baroni was also connected by way of canine track from the vehicle to the area on Dale Street where he was stopped with the $880 on his person. We also know that the relevance of this Dave Baroni is that Brooklyn Neifert is communicating with somebody on Snapchat with the username Dave Baroni for the purpose of doing a marijuana deal at the Speedway gas station. I believe that that kind of connects the dots between Dave Baroni and the defendant, Mr. Maher Zahari, and that it's in fact Dave Baroni in that front passenger seat. And it's the people's position that once Mr. Green, for whatever reason, was able to get that bag of marijuana without giving Mr. Zahari the full amount of money, it's $3,200, Mr. Green quickly bolted out of that rear passenger seat door in an effort to leave, to flee, to run away with the marijuana, having only paid $880. And it's in this time and moment of frustration and anger that this defendant pulled out his gun that he had already at the ready and fired 2 shots at Mr. Green. One of those bullets hitting him right in the back, another bullet hitting the door frame of the vehicle, presumably 2 shots being fired when that door is open. And Mr. Green is no longer, he's not a threat to anybody. There's been no evidence that Mr. Green was a threat to anyone, to Mr. Zahari, that he was shot in the back as he was attempting to leave with marijuana that likely he didn't pay full price for. And I believe that it's with that factual scenario, this defendant did have the intent to kill Mr. Green when he fired that shot in his back. And that the third element of murder in the second degree is that it was not justified, excused, or done under circumstances that would reduce it to a lesser crime. Simply at this probable cause hearing, there's been no evidence put forward that would satisfy that remaining element number 3. And for that, Your Honor, the people would request that this court find the defendant over on counts 1 and 2.
Sure.
Yes. What defense counsel saw in the video, I question that anyone else in this court saw, except maybe the officer in charge. But I think both sides, and certainly the defense, wishes that the gas station in question had spent a little more money on their security, because this is one time that the quality of the video lets anyone make whatever theory they have and can maybe find a little something that might support the credibility of their theory. But I didn't see anything that, or any particular argument that counsel made about the videotape and what it was certainly not seen by me. And I think that it's speculation of the highest degree to come up with the theory that the prosecution just presented to this court. The case of People versus Smith, 478 Michigan 64, sets out the elements of second-degree murder, and quoting, there must be a death. The death was caused by an act of the defendant. I think those are two hurdles that the prosecution, for basis even of preliminary exam, it's two hurdles that they managed to get over. But the fact that the defendant acted with malice, number 3, and number 4, the defendant did not have lawful justification or excuse for causing the death, are two hurdles that the prosecution trips over. I think that the court should bring this case to an end here. And I would ask the court to dismiss both counts.
Thank you. We've heard from a total of 8 witnesses in this case. 6 on June 21st, Lieutenant Koenigsmann, Police Officer Fowler, Police Officer McNeil, Police Officer Decker, Sergeant Chamberlain, and Detective Wood. Then today, on June 25th, we've heard from Brooklyn Neifert, the girlfriend of the decedent, and Dr. Mary Petrolangelo. I have reviewed exhibits by the people, the ballistic report, 8 photos of the vehicle and crime scene, the video, surveillance video from Domino's, the photos admitted today, and the autopsy report. There was one exhibit presented by defense that was proposed but not admitted. That being said, I find that the evidence does establish probable cause on each element of the crime. Probable cause to believe the defendant committed that crime. I find that the venue, identification, and elements have been met. I am binding the defendant over as charged for further proceedings in circuit court. Arraignment on the information. Who is the
Michael Servito, and he does his arraignments on Monday, which would be not in custody.
July 12th?
Yes.
Monday, July 12th at 1:30.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I am going to address the issue of bond at this point. After hearing the testimony, finding that probable cause does exist, I am going to increase the bond. I don't think that the bond is currently set is sufficient under the circumstances. I am going to increase the bond to 100,000. Are you on a GPS tether, sir?
Yes.
And I'm going to keep that in place as well. I don't know who reduced the bond originally set. It was before I took the bench. I think $100,000 bond is more in keeping with what is required here.
Your Honor, what better, first of all, I don't think danger to the community is an issue. You've got someone who has absolutely no criminal record whatsoever. And the risk of fight, this defendant has done everything. There's not been one single tiny violation of any of the bond conditions. He has been absolutely perfect. Both of the reasons for bond have been established, and he's proved himself. He has been on bond now for how many months?
9 months.
9 months on bond, and absolutely no problem, no allegation of anything. He has, the bond, the purpose of bond has been demonstrated. That the judge that who set this bond was your successor, your predecessor, I apologize, your predecessor, who probably has one of the toughest reputations on bond in Macomb County. And he felt that bond was sufficient.
I appreciate your argument. I am comfortable with my decision to increase the bond. You can take it up with Judge Servito in circuit court, but as it stands in my courtroom, the bond is increased to 100,000.
We'll bring it to you.
You're all set, yes.
We'll
Thank
have
you.
your file in the back.
I ordered the transcript.
Yep, give me just a second. I have a request for you, Mr. Grimm. Here you go, Mr. Grimm. You are welcome.
That concludes this hearing today. Just in time for our 4 o'clock meeting.
No. I have to go back through this because, you know, our system doesn't let us. Like once there's a bond posted and you put the new bond in, for whatever reason, it doesn't populate properly. So
We gotta make sure it populates.
I just gotta make sure.